All right, so we'll get into this. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about valuation, how buyers approach valuation, and a few things that business owners can do to increase their valuation. And if we have time, I'll get into a recent case study for an e-commerce company. Just quickly, a little bit about me. I founded my firm in 2014. We provide exit planning, consulting, and M&A advisory services to clients. So we will get involved potentially 1 to 3 years ahead of the time when they're thinking about selling, and we will work with them to establish a baseline valuation and then make some recommendations and work with them to do some things that will increase the valuation that will ultimately improve the selling price. Our target market, our businesses 5 to 50 million in revenue. We found that to be a really great spot in the market that's underserved, and we can add a lot of value in that space. We have an 84% close rate on deals that we've done, which is far better than the industry average, which I've read is about 30%. So we take on a very select set of clients every year and work very closely with them and want to make them successful. A little bit about me. Before I was in this, I started my career at Arthur Andersen. I was in their IT consulting group until they imploded in 2002 in the wake of the Enron scandal. And then I went over to Technicolor, where I was there for about 12 years. And that's when I got into M&A. The CEO of Technicolor was a firm believer. He was a former investment banker, and he wanted to radically reposition the company through M&A. So he created a corp dev group, and I was asked to be a part of that group. It was a very exciting time to be there. We did about $500 million worth of deals and on the buy side, and then we did some work on the sell side. We sold RCA, the iconic American brand. So I fell in love with M&A at Technicolor, and unfortunately, I was working just 90, 100 hours a week. It was a little intense, and I thought there'd be a better way to go about it. So I started my firm in 2014. And I set up shop as a consulting firm, and it quickly led me to lower middle market business owners that wanted help transitioning out of their businesses. I have my UCLA undergrad. I went to UCLA as an undergrad, graduated in '96, and got my MBA from the other school across town. And my email is kevin@kinected.com if you have any questions. A little bit more about the firm. I mentioned our focus is 5 to 50 million in sales. There's a team. I've aligned myself with other M&A professionals, and we support each other on various deals. I have a very diverse team that works across industries, so we can bring in definitely an expert for whatever industry we're working in. And like I said, part of our model is getting involved early, a couple of years ahead of time, where we can really get to know the business and make some recommendations that will ultimately improve the sellability. Okay, so the current, I just thought we'd start with just current snapshot of where we are in this market. 2021 was a record deal for the M&A industry overall. It was $5 trillion worth of deals done. I don't work in the mega deal space. Like I said, my deals are 5 to 50 million. That market was also incredibly red hot. So what's driving that? There's a lot of factors that are driving that. So private equity have become just serial buyers in the space. And that's really who most of our deals are selling to at this point. Private equity has $1.5 trillion in capital that they've raised to do deals. And given the COVID year, they weren't able to do all the deals that they wanted to do. So they had to double down in 21 on their deal flow. And that's why, one of the reasons why the market's been very active. There's a ton of capital chasing fewer deals. So multiples are up. We're also in this environment of historically low interest rates, although that's increasing. It's nothing to be concerned about. Also, taxes are expected to increase. And then also, we're part of the biggest wealth transition in history right now, where baby boomers are at or near retirement age. And by and large, their children are not interested in inheriting, taking over these businesses. So there's a huge percentage of baby boomer net worth that are wrapped up in their businesses, and they are looking for liquidity. So all these factors together are manifesting themselves in a very, very hot market, especially for sellers in the segment that I'm playing in, which I'm calling the lower middle market.
I could ask a question.
Yeah, please.
Do you deal specifically with private equity or any other sources of funding?
Private equity just happen to be very, very strong buyers. They're professional buyers. They move quickly. Right. They know how to do it. But strategic buyers are also very strong, depending on the deal. And if I have a deal that's under, I'd say, $5 million of value, there could be an individual buyer as well. In those deals, buyers can get SBA loans and get a very, very low fixed rate interest rate to do a deal with like a 10-year amortization. So those can be really, really good deals too for deals under 5 million.
Right.
All right, so let's get into it. So any other questions on the market or kind of what field I'm in and who I'm targeting? And so all my kind of advice and guidance here is geared towards these kind of 5 to 50 million revenue companies. Anything I can answer before we jump in? All right, so the first piece here is valuation. So how do we do that? So what we do is we start out looking at the financial statements. And this is a huge challenge for a lot of companies in this space, just giving me these financial statements, because a lot of times they're not well prepared. They're done by a bookkeeper that doesn't really understand all the industry nuances. A lot of times I see cash basis financials when the buyers want to see accrual basis. So there's a lot of work needs to get done just to get clean financials. So once I get these kind of interim financials, what do? Well, the first thing I do is I normalize the financials. So I start with the net income of the business, and then we apply various adjustments to the business. So I'd say about 95% of the businesses I see are they run their businesses optimized to pay low taxes, right? So they're taking out a lot of family expenses. They're taking out, I've seen crazy things like kids' private school education. I've seen boat payments. I've seen second homes. I've seen employees paid under the table. I've seen a lot in the 8 years I've been doing this of companies that find very creative ways to, run expenses through the business. So it's my job, before I can give them an accurate sense of value, I need to understand all those expenses. I'm not an IRS narc. I'm not trying to go to the IRS and create trouble. I just need to understand what the cash flow is going to look like for the buyer, because I need to represent, hey, buyer, this business is going to, based on what we've seen so far, average Ebitda for the last 3 years is 2.2 million. So I need to confidently go to the buyer and share that kind of data. So what I do is I look at all the different the adjustments to Ebitda here. So we first of all add back the obvious, the interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. We add those items back, and then we look for some of the other expenses: personal travel, personal entertainment, owner healthcare. A lot of business owners that I work with own their own property, so they may or may not be paying themselves market rent on the property. If they are not, then I'll need to do some research and talk to some commercial brokers in the area, figure out what market rates for rent are. And then there'll be an adjustment, and that adjustment could be favorable, it could be up or down depending on the rent. Same with salaries. We need to adjust for market salaries. I've seen a lot of business owners that have children that are not working in the business, but they're still getting paid a salary. Well, that'll add that salary back, as long as I can demonstrate that that individual is clearly not working in the business. So all of these expenses, one other thing to consider is kind of one-time or non-recurring expenses. A business a huge warehouse that moved one time over the last couple of years, they're going to expend a significant expense in moving expenses one time. So I think it's reasonable to add that back. If you have like an isolated litigation incident, we can talk about adding that back. So what I'm trying to do, it's called recast the earnings and come up with adjusted Ebitda. And this has to be rock solid. This has to pass the test of a buyer. Buyers are going to scour this information, and everything that we report has to be documented. So this is step one, is getting to this recast. Any questions so far?
I assume I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now, are you saying some business owners actually deduct alimony and child support from their business?
I've seen things run through with creative names, and when you probe enough, turns out that's what it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Quick question: do you actually also look at the cash flow statements that reconcile their bank accounts?
I won't do that, but if we get into a process, or if it's a big enough deal, I will bring in an accounting firm to either get us reviewed or audited financials, and that will be part of that process. I'm taking a really kind of a P&L and balance sheet based approach to the opinion of value.
Okay.
All right. So that's step one. Is we need normalized financials that give a pretty reliable state of the Ebitda, adjusted Ebitda of the business. Okay. Step two is let's figure out the industry multiple. So what is a multiple? A multiple is really a reflection of risk more than anything. So we'll get into that. I have some examples from some current deals I'm working on. But the larger there's a few generalities here that apply. The larger the Ebitda, the larger the multiple in general. So publicly traded companies on average are trading, someone would probably know better than I do. They're probably trading somewhere between 15 and 20 times cash flow as a publicly traded company. Now, the deals that I see they're not trading at multiples at 12 to 15. Multiples that I'm seeing are like 4 to 8 is kind of the fair range of multiples for business in this size, 4 to 8. And a 4 times multiple would be a business. I'll get into that in a second, but an 8 times multiple is going to be a very fast growing business that has a very, very strong barriers to entry, very predictable cash flow, and very rock solid.
Thank you. Let us know if anyone has any questions afterwards. And
who's that? I think we're being Zoom bombed.
It might be the other Selwyn Miller.
It might be. There actually are 4 of us now, I think. Yeah. You guys who are called Selwyn Miller, could you please change your name in there by hovering over the top right of your square and clicking on rename. Kevin?
All right. Yeah. So we'll keep going. So step 2 is figuring out the multiple. How do I do this? Well, I have access to 3 different databases of transactions. One of them is reported by M&A professionals like myself. Another one is reported by bankers that do a lot of SBA loans. I also have access to kind of an industry Bible, which just reflects what different transactions have sold for over the years. And then I also know several folks that run valuation firms. I kind of double check my numbers with them. So an industry tends to have a certain multiple. And then I have to use some judgment to figure out, all right, well, historically, if this was a retail store that was doing this kind, I don't really do a lot of retail, but I'm just giving an example of a retail store. Retail may be very harshly affected by the last few years and the acceleration of COVID on e-commerce. So retail might be a beaten down segment. So maybe historically, if the retail multiple was 5 or 6 times, over the last 20 or 30 years, it's probably not going to be that high of a multiple going forward. So I'm looking at these points down here. So what are the trends on the company in profits and pricing? What has the trend line been over the last couple of years? Where does the industry stand in its maturity? Is this a fast growing industry? Is it a shrinking industry? If it's a shrinking industry, then our multiple is probably going to be at or less the historical average. Does the business have any specific issues like over-reliance on a certain customer? This is a very big point. It's called customer concentration. If a business has more than 15 or 20% of its sales to a single customer, a buyer is going to see risk in that. So that may be a reason why a buyer puts in a lower offer. So if you're the seller, you need to really have a really strong story for the customer concentration. Why is this customer so strong? And hopefully you have some contracts supporting it. Hopefully you have a long-term relationship. Hopefully you have multiple touch points at the client. but you're going to need, that will be discussed during diligence. Buyer will definitely bring that up. Working capital. Does the business have more inventory than it should have? We got to make adjustments there. Is the AR all collectible? Those are things we look at. The team. Is the team, are there mid-level managers, or is the owner overly involved personally? Is there personal goodwill that may be difficult to transfer over? Is the seller willing to finance a little bit? Most deals that we see in the space are not 100% cash. It's very, very rare to see a deal that's 100% cash. Usually a buyer will ask for the seller to lend them a small amount of the purchase price. Private equity firm will likely take some of the equity, ask the sellers to roll over some equity, or there might be an earnout if there's a split on expectations of value. So very, very rare to see 100% cash deals. And anytime I have an owner that's insisting on 100% cash, I'm telling them that we're really going to be shortcutting the process and probably limiting our buyer pool. I'm also looking at, are the leases and contracts transferable? You know, I did an aerospace deal a couple of years ago, and those are kind of tough to transfer over some of the certifications and agreements. So that definitely plays a role and might lead you to a certain type of deal structure. And then also the equipment. Is the equipment maintained well? Is the company underspending on capital? Is there deferred maintenance? So these are all things that factor into the multiple. So here's just kind of a little chart I created. This is definitely not hard and fast rules, but you know, a business, let's just start in the middle. The typical deal that I'm seeing in the space is a 4 to 6 times the multiple. And what are the characteristics of that kind of business? So it's a relatively small business with that's marketable, it's doing well, it has growth. There are some barriers to entry. It's kind of considered like a medium level risk deal. The financials are in good shape. They're compiled or reviewed by a reputable accountant. There are accounting systems in place. I can get monthly financials, and there's not tremendous amount of reliance on the owner. So an example of that, I did an aircraft parts deal that sold in this range. I also recently did a plumbing services deal that also sold in this range. Now, what's a multiple that's going to be less than 4 times? So that's going to be like a Main Street business, like I don't know, call it like
grocery store.
Sure, yeah, grocery store, restaurants, retail, some smaller service-based businesses, and I tend to stay away from these because they tend to have some cash elements involved. And they tend to be less than 5 million in revenue. And when I'm dealing with those size deals, it's just more difficult to find buyers. Buyers tend to not be as well funded. So I tend to try to stay away from these deals. And these are really the biggest problem with these businesses is they have a lot of reliance on the owners, a lot of personal goodwill. Their books are not professionally prepared. They don't have a deep team. And there's really kind of, these are undifferentiated businesses. So I'm looking for really a business with a story, with a track record, with something that can pass on, that will survive the owner. And let's go to the other side of the coin. What's a business that's going to sell for more than 6 times? Well, this is going to be a business that's really in demand. This is going to be a segment that is very hot, major growth potential, high barriers to entry, company with something proprietary, like a brand, something they've developed, really strong, diverse customer relationships, growth in different parts of the world. This is going to be a business that's really, really humming and has tremendous growth potential. And something, examples of these are software as a service software companies, recurring revenue. Buyers love recurring revenue. They're going to have really strong systems, really strong management. And again, this is not a hard and fast rule. It's just kind of meant to be indicative of just 3 tiers of multiples. All right, so now we can get into some examples from deals I've been working on over the last several months. I'll tell you about this e-commerce apparel company. I can't go into too much detail on it. The buyer doesn't want to be known. The seller doesn't want their name out there. And I can't disclose the price, but I will say that we sold this one for several multiples higher than we thought we would because the company really just did incredibly well and grew tremendously throughout COVID. and this multiple is well above 8 times. Another business is a clinical trials research business. This is a very, very hot market. The space is consolidating. So we're likely to see multiples in this space well above 5 or 6 times. Another very hot space is e-learning, especially if there's recurring revenue. Working with a company in this space where they provide educational content. They have different ascension paths for you start out with a monthly recurring product, and then they will sell different products. That one's going to be about 6.5 times, hopefully. An IT security firm with some recurring revenue is going to be about 6 times. Aerospace parts, this is a small one, about $1 million in Ebitda, goes for about 4 times. A plumbing firm with 95% residential, incredibly distributed revenue base, very strongly run, great track record, about 4 times, and then a couple of smaller examples than that. All right. Any questions on some of these kind of recent valuation examples? Again, this is just my observations of the market of the kind of range of businesses that I commonly see.
If any of those are not C corporations, I assume you're taking out an estimated salary for the owner if he or she is working in the business. How do you calculate that?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So we have to look at all the compensation the owner's paying themselves. And then when we do our valuations on an Ebitda basis, we need to add back a market salary. So let's just say the owner's taking out $500,000 in salary, but the market rate would be $200,000. It would be a favorable $300,000 add back in that case. All right, looks like there's a question here. Yeah.
There's a question from Mark Siegel. Did you see that?
Yeah. Yeah, you know what, Mark? We are not sure. This is the range. There's a very, very wide range in the clinical trial space from what I've seen. Very depending on geographic focus, patient focus, therapeutic focus, buyer interest. There's a huge range, but it also depends on the size as well. So I agree. I'm just looking at one specific example, but I'd love to talk to you offline, Mark, and learn a little bit more about your perspective too. Maybe you have some data that can help me.
Kevin, I just want to jump in. I'm noticing that multiples over the last year or two have been in far excess of what would be normal. It looks like there's a lot of dollars chasing fewer opportunities out there, and they're paying up for it.
That's exactly right. I mean, the last few processes I've been in have been ultra competitive with, I'm getting 40 plus NDAs per deal and 6 to 8 LOIs. So that's exactly right. And we're seeing that the sellers are absolutely able to dictate terms. So yeah, multiples are up, but it has to be a reflection of a very, very well-run company. And then if that's the case, then absolutely you will see higher than average multiples. That's a great point. Client concentration is a huge point as well. Okay. So any other questions on this? On just multiples?
All of these deals, you represented seller side, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the things that sellers can do to increase the value of the business? So that's kind of the next point of this. So I'll move into this. So I have about eight factors here that we can talk about. So recurring revenue is a huge factor because buyers are seeking safety. When they look at the earnings, the number one thing they're trying to figure out is how secure are these earnings? How likely are these earnings, this cash flow stream? How likely is the stream of cash flows to continue into the future? And when you have a recurring revenue business model, there's nothing better than that. You're taking payments every month from buyers, and as long as you continue to provide them value and you have a low attrition rate, these businesses are selling at very, very high multiples. So when I meet with a client, I'm always probing for, is there a way to add a recurring revenue model? I recently met with an HVAC company, and they are starting to pilot, maintenance program, quarterly maintenance program, and it's maybe not high dollars, maybe it's $250 a quarter, but it has a lot of value to buyers. It's very sticky. You're more likely to have more touch points with the customers. And as long as you continue to service them, this can be incredibly profitable work. So software companies are great examples of this. They've done that incredibly well. And there's a book by John Warlow called The Automatic Customer. And he provides at least 10 or so different ways that companies can provide recurring revenue business models to their clients. So it doesn't work for all industries, but it does for many, so more than you think. Number two, stability. So sounds pretty obvious, but I see a lot of business owners that have kind of a checkered if I look at the last 3 or 5 years, the earnings and the revenue are kind of all over the place. It makes for a very difficult story for buyers to digest. Especially with COVID, and all businesses kind of had different reactions to COVID. I've seen many companies that benefited incredibly well from COVID, especially an e-commerce deal that we worked on. But buyers are looking for stability. They're looking for a track record that's stable, consistent earnings, consistent growth. And if you can tell that story credibly, you're gonna wind up with a much higher multiple. So that's why I like to get involved a couple of years early. And if there's like 1 year that's dramatically off, we need to move away from that year and get a couple, 1 or 2 more years of very consistent growth beyond that troubled year. Another important factor is the macro environment. I mean, what is happening in the macro environment right now? Certain industries have really accelerated through COVID. E-commerce is one. All the at-home businesses have really benefited from this. So what is happening in the macro environment is very, very key factor. And, I see some businesses that just assume that they're going to continue to go on forever. I'm speaking with an apparel textiles company that has really, the revenues are significantly down from where they were a few years ago. And even if they're, still pretty hefty, they were like 50 million, now they're down to 30 million. I mean, that is going to definitely be a problematic story for buyers. You can't cost cut your way to a high multiple. You got to be able to have a growth story, and you got to be playing into the macro factors as well. Diversified customer base. We talked about this one for a second. Customer concentration is one of the biggest factors that buyers look for. They want to be relatively confident that if a customer has a large, I'm sorry, Seth, I'm just focused on your yoga right now. Sorry. Sorry. No problem. Customer concentration is just it's a factor that all buyers look at. It's in the top 3 questions that I'm asked about when they see customers, and they want to know what's the track record, who are the touch points at the client, is there one buyer that you deal with, is there multiple buyers? So we need to be able to make sure that the thread to that client ideally has a contract, ideally has multiple touch points, ideally goes back many years. And in some industries, it's just very difficult to not have customer concentration. The aerospace parts business, there are only so many tier 1 defense contractors. So your chances are you're going to be dealing with, one of the big guys or 2 of the big guys, and they're going to keep giving you work. So it's very hard. And it's also hard for a lot of companies when they have this, they latch on to this Fortune 500 buyer who's a great buyer, and they keep giving them more and more and more work. It's very hard not to say no to that work. So that's a challenge I find a lot of sellers get trapped into. So it's very important that sellers are methodical when they take on that work. Hopefully they're not giving up margin by doing that as well. And hopefully that there's a plan to diversify. So it's just, this is definitely one that comes up on just about every deal concentration. So we need to do a lot of prep in telling the buyer the story.
Kevin,
yes.
Comment, obviously concentration can be a risk, but on the other hand, as you mentioned, there may be a dominant supplier or customer in the marketplace, and a lot of it has to do also with whether you have agreements with these long-term agreements or captive agreements with these customers that really protect you.
That's right. If you have agreements, that is great. Yeah, that really what we're looking for. A lot of times I see this huge concentration without agreements, and it just when you see that, I just know that we're probably going to not have as high of a multiple. It's
right.
Probably also going to be a discount that's built in. It's probably also going to be some kind of earn-out structure that the buyer is going to push for. So it just really puts the seller on the defensive. If you come into a negotiation, you have 30, 40, 50% of your sales to one customer. It's just definitely a red flag to buyers. Okay, what else? So in the businesses that I work with, the lower middle market, a lot of times the seller is just too involved, frankly. They have the customer relationships. They are doing too much. They're generally doing the work of 2, 3, 4 people. So that presents risk to buyers. So I like to see a second in command. A test that I like to use is, can the seller take a 3-week vacation, and can the business keep going? If the answer is yes, then maybe the business is pretty well solidified. And if not, then we got to find this middle management. And I'll tell you what, when you're working with a private equity buyer and you don't have that middle management layer, they're going to ding you on your Ebitda. If you should have a director of finance person and you don't, or you don't have a COO, or you don't have a head of sales, some key roles that the owner's playing, when they look at what their earnings are going to be to them, they're going to adjust their earnings down to reflect the cost of the people that they need to replace. And that can be a pretty significant amount. So I look at bench strength, and anytime I see an owner that's working 100 hours a week, I think it's a red flag, and the buyers are going to question that heavily, and they're going to assume risk, and they're also going to assume that our earnings are overreported. So you definitely want to make sure that you have a solid team and any major holes are filled. Okay, number 6, clean books. So this is the number one problem I see in the space that I'm in the $5 to $50 million space. Companies are not used to preparing the level of financial reporting that buyers demand. Buyers in this space are sophisticated, and ultimately this is the number one thing we are selling is the books. I far too often see books that are on a cash basis, and maybe that works, but a lot of times businesses are underreporting their earnings, and they're shooting themselves in the foot by providing a cash basis financial statement. So oftentimes I will recommend that we not go to market until we can get accrual-based books in place, because that more accurately represents the current status of the business. Receivables matter, payables matter, working capital matters. Buyers want to know what the realistic working capital of the business is. So we have to have clean books. And at a certain size, a couple million in Ebitda, the financials should be reviewed by a reputable accounting firm. And once you're over, close to 10 million, then the book should be audited by a respected financial firm. So buyers give you a lot of credibility when you come into it with reviewed or audited financials. Sometimes we'll recommend a sell-side quality of earnings report. That is, the financial statements are one thing, but the quality of earnings goes much deeper on margins and margins trends and customer concentration. And that has become a very, very useful tool in selling businesses. And we can talk about that a little later. But the books, this is the number one challenge that I have, and most sellers have in going to market, is the books are not clean. They're not consistent from year to year. I need monthly books on an accrual basis, because now we're into February. And if I'm going to take a company to market, once we get into March and April, buyers are going to ask, well, how does this current 12-month period compare to the last 12-month period? So we got to be able to show monthly financials that are consistent. And if there's any drop off in those earnings, it's an opportunity for a buyer to renegotiate. So sellers need to keep their foot on the gas throughout the process. And we talked about that too.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Just from a planning standpoint, are you suggesting that a company change their books to accrual basis and then wait a couple of years with an accrual basis before they sell it? Or
no, not necessarily. I think it can be done simultaneously. I'm working on one right now, and we think we can get the books cleaned up in a couple weeks. We have a really good CFO working on it. So I think what we would do in this particular case is I would ask for 2021 to be done on a monthly basis, but previous years we can do it on an accrual basis. So it's a lot less work that way. And then going forward, the business should be running as accrual basis. They can still pay their taxes on a cash basis. That's a separate discussion. But in order to maximize the earnings and for a buyer to really understand working capital, it's really important that we have accrual-based books.
Okay.
Okay. Number 7, a niche. So buyers like to see, to use a Warren Buffett term, a moat. They want to see a business that has built some meaningful differentiation in the market. I've seen a fair amount of undifferentiated Amazon businesses. They sell undifferentiated products online on Amazon or eBay. They don't really have a brand. Even though they could be making really good money, really strong earnings, that's not going to have a strong multiple. There's no brand. There's no differentiation to importing kind of undifferentiated product from Asia. That's not going to be a business that resonates in this market. So I'd like to see a business that really owns its segment. Whatever they're doing, I want to see some data that shows that they're one of the market leaders in the space, either the geographic leader, product leader, some real meaningful differentiation. That becomes incredibly important. And then SOPs and playbook. So buyers like to see processes in place. They want to see an org chart and clear lines of responsibility. They like to see processes and SOPs, which are absolutely critical, especially in any kind of regulated industry. This is a sign that just the fact that you have this puts the business's best foot forward, gives the buyers a really strong first opinion on the business, and it shows that the owner is very well organized. And this is one of the ways that businesses also get top dollar. It's just showing that employees have job descriptions. Here's the training manuals. Everything's in place. So we will gather all that information and put all these different items in a data room before we go to market. But these are my kind of eight items that I feel are just absolutely essential to review with the client before we're going to market and try to tell the best possible story to position the business optimally before we start talking to buyers. Any questions on these 8 points or valuation? I had a couple more things to go through, but we can stop here for some questions.
Kevin, just another quick question. I didn't see anything in here about operational issues. Maybe I've missed that, but things like cleaning up disputes, cleaning up your balance sheet, getting contracts resolved and or put in place to strengthen. Did I miss that?
No, that's absolutely right. I don't have a separate bullet point, but I would put that under this kind of documented playbook where when we go to market, we have a data room. I have all, when the buyers, after they sign the NDA, after they see the book, after they made an initial offer, they want to do more diligence, give them access to a private data room. They see that data room. They see everything just perfectly organized. Here's all the financials. Here's all our contracts. Here's all our tax returns. Here's all our past litigation. Everything's closed and tidied. So I put a bow around this entire package before the buyer sees anything. And it's a great point because it's absolutely critical because I don't want to piecemeal the stuff to buyers later. I want to be fully organized by from the get-go. But that's a really good point. Okay. Anything else before we move on? How are we doing on time, Selwyn?
Oh, plenty.
Okay.
What's the time here? 12:52. So we have another 38 minutes.
Okay. All right. We may not need all that time, but I'll keep going. So All right, a couple other things I wanted to mention. I think this is just really interesting. You know, the most important aspect of the deals is psychology. So I find myself being really a therapist, not a trained therapist. I'm not a trained therapist, but I find that these deals are emotionally draining on all parties. The typical deal is going to be 6 to 10 months. Even if the business is well prepared. I mean, we can shave some time off the process if the business is amazingly well prepared, but the process is going to take time. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs. There's an old adage in this industry that deals need to fall apart 3 times before they close. So that has been very much my experience on most deals, is that something will happen along the way. A buyer may lose, a seller may lose a key customer, an employee may quit, a buyer may pull out, and it's just, these deals are stressful. So I try to really do my best to keep the seller grounded. You know, I try to meet with my seller. I like to have sellers that are kind of in Southern California, so I can really develop a personal relationship with them and go talk to them. But my biggest part of my job is managing expectations. So I try to be conservative on my opinions of value. When I first meet a client, I don't want to promise them the 8 times multiple if I think there's a 20% chance of that. I want to promise them, I want to give them, you know, here's the range and here's where I think you're going to fall in this range. And I try to counsel them towards the median or slightly above it. So I want to manage them. And then before I go to market, I want to make sure that they're comfortable landing, you know, within the mid part of that range. So I find myself, once we have that discussion about value, I find myself going back to that discussion many times. And a lot of my sellers are at retirement age or past retirement age, and they are very emotionally attached to these businesses. And at a certain point, it's not even really about money. Like, they are just so attached that, you know, they come to me, they know that they're at retirement age, they know that they want to move on, but sometimes they just are too emotionally attached that they can't move on. And so I have to remind them that, look, you wanted to sell this business, you wanted to move on, I'm getting you, this is the number we thought we'd get, we're getting it. So you can't be annoyed if this might, you know, the buyer's taking a little too long, the buyer's lawyer is taking a little too long. Let's be grounded. Let's be patient. Let's remind ourselves where we are in the process. We're at the 5-yard line. So I do a lot of coaching like that. The seller has to be actively involved. I've had a couple times where I've been in a deal and the seller kind of checks out along the way. They feel like, hey, the process is running itself. I got this great offer from the buyer. It's going to close. No. Seller has to have their foot on the gas the entire time and can never let go. Because if earnings take a hit at any point during the process, you are giving that buyer an opportunity to renegotiate. Never want to have that discussion. Never want to open that door. So the seller needs to keep checked into the business, communicating, and not letting on to the employees anything's going on. They need to be fully present. We often work with business owners to provide incentives for key employees to stay focused through closing. A lot of deals, buyers are going to ask for sellers to any deal that's kind of tied to an earnout where the business performance has to be business has to perform into the future. It's going to be really important for key employees to be retained. So we will work with sellers to help structure some incentive plans, and often those look like, you know, kind of 1/3 of the incentive at closing, and then maybe another 2/3 of that potential bonus over the term of the earnout, over up to a couple years. So there's a lot we could talk. This could be its own session about just deal psychology, but my role as a kind of an intermediary is to shield a lot of the stress of the deal off the seller, be a coach, be a cheerleader, be responsive to the seller, and also you know, be responsive to the buyer, keep the process moving. So I'm this kind of critical person in between buyer and seller, but really trying to shield the seller from a lot of the stress, and there's always stress, no matter how much I would like to have it go away. All right, I'm just gonna take a sip of water. Okay, any questions on this? I can talk about a case study, a really fun one that I just worked on.
Kevin, can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
What's typical of the fee for your services? It sounds like you take a total package program all the way through the end of the transaction. So what's the basis for your fees, and what's traditional in the industry?
Yeah, so I mean, so the fee is largely a success fee. There are times that we'll take kind of an upfront marketing fee, but most of our compensation is going to be in a success fee. So our interests are completely aligned with the seller. You know, it's a percentage of the deal, and it's really kind of a sliding scale downwards. And we use what's called the double Lehman scale. So it's typically like 10% of the first million in value, 8% on the second million in value, 6% on the third million, and then kind of tapers off at about 4% above that. And we're flexible in our model, but I think that's most people in my space tend to charge some version of this double Lehman scale.
Very good. So it's not typically a fixed price structure or some incentive-based fee structure?
It's a success fee. It's a contingent fee. And then what we like to do is work on, if we hit some kind of stretch goal, we like to get a bonus. I think that's kind of a fun and interesting way to do it, and the sellers tend to like that too. Yeah. All right. So I had the really unique opportunity to work on a really incredible deal in the alternative e-commerce space. So I can't say the name of the client, and I can't say the buyer, and I can't say the seller, and I can't say the price, but I can tell you that this was a absolutely tremendous experience for a really unique company. So I was incredibly lucky to work with this brand. I met this company in 2017. I'm in a networking group called Provisors. I think, Paul, I may have met you there at one point. And I happen to know the CPA that was working with this company. I was introduced in 2017, and I met the owner, and he had just come to the US. This is a company that was founded in the UK in 2010, and they're in this kind of alternative lifestyle space. So their clientele tend to wear a lot of black. They tend to have probably higher than average amount of tattoos, higher than average amount of piercings. It's kind of a unique segment of the market, but I was really intrigued by this company, and this business owner was just an incredible person. And he told me in our first meeting that they had a 3-year plan to drive this company, to run it really hard and sell this thing in 3 years. So I knew that this guy was going to be very thoughtful. I had a chance to build a relationship. They founded this company in 2010 in the UK as an e-commerce business model, and they came to the US in 2015, and I met them in 2017. So let me just tell you a little bit more about this. So this business, they sell a product in 135 countries. They have this incredibly highly efficient e-commerce business model where they're really running so lean. I mean, it's a staff of 30 to 40 worldwide. You know, look at these metrics, you know, like $800,000 per employee and 300,000 Ebitda per employee. Just incredible growth. And this point right here was one of the best selling points. They were acquiring so many customers. They had a social media. One of the great things about e-commerce is, first of all, you get the incredible profit margin. They were developing products for very low cost in Asia, and they had a very strong brand, and they were launching about 30 new products a week. So they were just growing tremendously. But they had 2.5 million followers on social media. So they would be promoting all their products on social media, which allowed them to get new customers for about $5 per user. And the lifetime value of the user, I forget exactly where it was, but it was like $50, probably at least 10 to 1, probably 15 to 1, which is an incredible ratio. customer acquisition cost to lifetime value. And that's
Did they have a subscription value? Was this a subscription?
No, it's not a subscription. It's just e-commerce, but they engendered tremendous loyalty. They're the leader worldwide in this segment, and they were relentless in their product releases, releasing new products every week, giving their customers a new reason to come back. We're really interested in who is this customer. So the seller didn't have a lot of data on who this customer was. We hired a data scientist at one point, and we found out that this customer, higher than median income, more likely to own property, more likely to have college degrees. So it gave the buyers a lot of confidence that this was a pretty high quality customer. That this is in the middle of COVID too. I mean, this is unbelievable. We built this process. I met them in 17. We prepared the business through 19, brought in a CFO, got the audits done, quality of earnings done in March of 2020. And I'm thinking we're dead in the water here. I mean, this is April of 2020. I've been working on this thing for 18 months. I feel like who's gonna buy clothes right now? I'm not leaving the house. I'm wearing the same sweats every day. But sure enough, this company kept selling, and their earnings were growing tremendously. So we ended up going to market in April of 2020. I personally reached out to 300 buyers through this process. And it was amazing because I could actually get through to buyers in this time. And I think COVID may have been a benefit. We ended up with 40 signed NDAs. We had 6 offers, sold for an incredible valuation. What were the challenges of this business? Business was very lean. The sellers were each doing the job of 2 or 3 people. So the buyer certainly, had to add a lot of headcount to this. It was a very complex international deal. The company was based in the UK. The sellers, and the US business, which is where I was plugged into, the sellers were living in Hong Kong. They were very, very smart to move to Hong Kong. They never established a US residency. So being Hong Kong residents, they had an incredibly tax efficient structure. It was brilliant what they did. And then our market timing, it was tough to get buyers to take a look at this deal, even though the earnings were absolutely incredible. It was tough to get a lender. The buyer was almost 0 for 50 on getting a lender, because lenders just didn't want to lend on apparel in this time. So I just had a couple little fun metrics on this thing, and then we can wrap up. There's 11,000 emails sent on this deal. I mean, I worked on this thing nonstop for 18 months. I measure my lead time in years. It's a 3.5-year deal cycle. I reached out to 275 buyers. It took about 7 months from the first touch point with the buyer to closing. There were 60 team members that worked on this deal. 50 banks were looking at this deal, and 49 said no, mostly because of the subject matter. They saw the website and it just couldn't touch it, right? It couldn't touch the tattoos and the piercings. They couldn't do it. The seller was in Hong Kong. He had to come out to the US a couple times, and each time he would reset that quarantine clock. They spent 42 days in a Hong Kong government hotel. 34 attorneys were working on this thing around the globe. Wow. At the closing, there were 22 different firms that got wires. And this is just a funny point, is that ultimately the bank that lent the money, they were a little worried. One of the guys was a little worried that this was satanic, which it wasn't. But they made a kind of deal that only 10% of the revenue of the company could be satanic. So I just put this little picture in. So that was the agreement, the final agreement that had to get made to get this deal done. So it's just an absolutely incredible deal, kind of a once in a decade type deal for me to have just an incredible success. But the sellers are now very happy. They've moved on from the business. They are now living in the British Virgin Islands and living the good life. So just felt really great to have an incredible ending to this 3.5-year journey.
Kevin, how'd you finance this deal?
So private equity, there's a private equity firm that put in about 50% cash. They got a lender to put in about 30% about 25%. I don't have the exact percentages, and the sellers rolled over some equity. So the sellers still own a good chunk in the business as well. And I mean, this private equity buyer has an incredible track record of selling companies, you know, for 3 to 5 times what they pay in 5 to 7 years. So there's a very high probability at a second or third exit down the road that will give the sellers potentially another, you know, second bite of the apple. So that's my talk for today. What do you guys think?
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Questions?
Go ahead.
Questions? No? Well, you overwhelmed everybody there, Kevin.
Hard to tell.
Yeah.
Hard to tell.
This is the kind of talk that I like to hear, where the speaker obviously knows his stuff inside and out.
Thank you.
And we know, okay, if we need someone who does what you do, then we know whom to call. So I don't know if you want to give a phone number as well.
Sure. I can put it in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Edward has a question.
Okay. Oh, good question. Non-closing scenario. So like a deal that like blows up. Yeah. Yeah, it does happen. I mean, yeah. So, I mean, hopefully the business is still running strong, and hopefully the seller did not take their foot off the gas, and we still have something we can sell. And hopefully there's a backup buyer that's still there, that's still interested because the numbers still support it. So, you know, it's definitely a case-by-case basis, but you got to lean on the fact that you had a strong company, and hopefully the seller still can show a strong company to a new set of buyers. But it's very difficult when that happens. It's very hard to get the same value. It's just like a house that, you know, can't sell. It's been in escrow so many times, keeps falling through escrow. Buyers are going to smell blood in the water, and they're, you know, whatever offer they made in the first round, very unlikely you're going to get that same offer again. So those are tough, but if you have a strong business, you can still do it. But it's frustrating for everybody. You know, everyone has deal fatigue at a certain point. So it's not a great scenario, but it's certainly not uncommon, I would say.
Thank you.